G'day listeners, and welcome back to another episode of the Keeper League podcast. We're the AFL Fantasy podcast that doesn't talk about the superstars. We only talk about the lesser knowns and the players that are going to bring value to your draft and Keeper League teams. My name's Heff and I'm joined by my co-host Darcy. How you going, mate?
Yeah, good, Heff. I'm keen to talk about these teams we got on today. There's a few exciting keeper prospects in these three teams.
All right, before we get stuck into them, you're fresh off the debut. You're onto your second podcast. Now,
Yeah, mate.
I'm assuming this week when you were walking down the street, you were just swamped by people that, as the new Keeper League co-host, everyone saying your name, you're the hottest name on everyone's lips. How many people come up to you recognising the street? Were you kissing babies, all that sort of stuff this week?
Look, luckily for me, I've been sticking at home quite a bit lately. I'm, working from home at the moment, so I sort of avoided the spotlight, but I am sure every time I went out, I was really quite worried for the pap.
Yep.
They're coming after me, early.
Lucky you're wearing masks and stuff these days around town. It's very hard to recognise you have the sunnies on too.
That's why I cut the hair as well, to sort of really just have to avoid. Anyway, I don't know where you go with this, but we'll move on.
I just thought we'd riff on something at the start, so that would do. But anyway, we'll get stuck in tonight's podcast. So tonight we are looking at Collingwood, Essendon and Fremantle. Unfortunately, we don't have Kaes again tonight, but he should be back next week. Fingers crossed. So hopefully we have Kaes back next week. But that will include Kaes returning for our rankings podcast as well.
Rankings are here already, aren't they?
Yep. How are yours looking, Dossie? I'm sure you've started and you're on top of everything.
I'm on top of it completely. It's a long process as well, trying to wrap your head around doing, traditionally doing a lot of the draft, normal draft rankings, moving towards that keeper focus, understanding where kind of players fit when you're thinking more long term, and also balancing that short term as well, because you still want to win flags in your keeper league. So, looking forward to it.
Well, I actually started mine today, so I've ranked my top 50 is probably almost set. So now I reckon the harder part is the 51 to 100.
Any spicy takes coming up for us next week?
Got Will Day real high. Love that kid. Not super high, but maybe in the top 30 or so. So I'm not sure if that's heaps high. But anyway,
looking forward to it.
Anyway, if you're a member, you'll get access to our top 100 rankings, and you'll also get access to the podcast we do discussing our top 100 defender rankings as well. If you're not a member, you'll still get access to some of the rankings, just not the full 100. So but if you want access to everything, sign up along with all of our other great resources. Head to keepleaguepod.com.au and sign up as a member. So anyway, we'll get stuck in tonight's podcast. Just for new listeners, we probably should have mentioned this last week, Dossie. We don't talk about rookies on these podcasts.
Yes.
The reason for that is because we've already done podcasts and articles and everything on the rookies already. That's up on our website. Members have access to the rookie top fantasy draftees podcast if they want to check that out. So they probably will get mentioned in passing and things like that in terms
obviously
of tactics and lineups.
Keeper leagues, you're always frothing over that next potential star. So we understand that, people do want to hear that, and there is that content there. It was like when I was coming in, I'm like, we have to mention Nick Dacos today. Like, no, we've already covered that.
Yeah, we've talked about him. We've talked about it already, Dusty. Ease up. But anyway, let's get stuck into the podcast. So tonight we are talking about, what are we talking about? Collingwood, Essendon and Fremantle. So let's get stuck in. All right, first cab off the rank tonight. It's a player that all of us are very excited about, I think. Probably you and Kaes more so than I am, but I still love the guy. And that is Patti Lipinski. So we're really excited about Patti Lupinski this season. After being traded to Collingwood, he seems to be in line for a regular midfield gig in 2021, and we couldn't be more excited for it here. As you can tell by Dossie's shouts in the background. So as you're probably aware, the Western Bulldogs midfield is a tough one to crack. So Lipinski was forced to play on the wings in the senior side when he prefers to play as an inside midfielder. He also failed to play a game after round 16, showing that he was firmly on the outer down at Footscray there. So
robbed.
Yep, absolutely. Played a few VFL games, played 4 games for a fantasy average of 114.5 with a top score of 143 points coming against Geelong in round 10 of the VFL. In this game, he had 16 kicks, 20 handballs, 6 tackles and 3 goals. He played inside mid in these games, basically, like his natural spot. So we have seen what his fantasy scoring can be if he gets that role, playing in the twos, albeit, but yeah. So despite not looking down his spot at Western Bulldogs, he's shown some promise at AFL level in previous years. So when he was given midfield opportunities in 2019, that was his 3rd season of senior footy, he managed to average 85.5. And I think he was listed as a forward that year as well.
I reckon, and I wouldn't have thought, I don't reckon we wouldn't have had the centre bounces back then. I don't think anyone was really covering it, and Champion Data was sort of holding on to it back then. I wouldn't have thought he would have been heavy on the centre bounces back then, like in 2019 when he averaged 85.5. I still don't think he's ever had
the full role.
And just before you move on, because I don't think you've got these numbers here as well, but on the centre bounce attendance numbers, off the top of your head, what would you think he would have got last year in the games that he did play?
Under 10%.
Absolutely.
Yeah, like
3%. He only attended centre bounces on 2 games.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah, it would have been
ridiculous.
Very low. But yeah, by all reports, Craig McRae has been impressed with him, what he's seen in the preseason, and reckon he should be a permanent midfielder in 2022. So if that happens, I reckon the fantasy points should follow. You reckon, Dozzy?
Absolutely. Get the socials ready for this one. Patrick Lipinski is going 100 plus this year. Lock it in. Lock it in, Heff.
If only the camera switcher worked correctly on that one.
I'll have to do it again.
No, don't worry. I'll edit it on the video. Don't worry. I'll sort it out.
Look, I actually think everything's pointing towards just a massive season for Lipinski. Like, okay, we don't know what their midfield setup's necessarily going to be like. We don't know the likes of what Goey's going to be doing this year, if he's even going to be playing. We don't know what Craig McRae's going to take into account when he comes in. Is he going to want to roll with the veterans like your Crisps in there? Is he going to want to bring these guys in, and Pendles even? Is he going to try and play him a midfielder again? I just think Lipinski's gone there for an absolute reason, and it's going to be to go into the centre bounce for the first time in his career, get that proper run at it, and he's got the scoring pedigree in the seconds. He's just waiting for the opportunity, and it's here this year.
Yeah, it should be. We should see plenty of upside from Lipinski. I'm really excited to see what he can do at Collingwood. Just as we get through these players, we'll just chime in on the chat. So Jason Beck reckons Lipinski's very overrated. So that's on the chat. And Harley Philp has written, must have been leg day today with Heff and how short his shorts are. So another gym jibe there, Python's joke. But anyway.
Yeah, mate. You're going to need a new shirt soon, mate. Seriously. Pythons are just screaming for something a bit bigger.
Stop distracting us, Dossie. Let's move on. All right. So let's talk about the next one. So Caleb Poulter. So he forced his way into the senior side after 2 rounds in the VFL, scoring 80 and 93 in those 2 VFL games. Once he showed some promising signs. Once he came in, he showed some really promising signs. He had 51 on debut, which is nothing to write home about, but had a few rounds of mediocre scoring to start off with. But I'll put that down to just him warming into senior footy. Then went banging round 10. I reckon it was against Port Adelaide as well, with 108.
Yeah.
And then 2 weeks later, he turned up again with 105 points. So some really, we saw his ceiling, I guess, in those games, but he also played a couple of roles in 2021. So he started as a halfback flanker and ended up as a wing in parts of games. And then at the end of the season, senior footy kind of took its toll and was managed towards the back end of the season. But just looking back at his junior numbers to kind of demonstrate his fantasy pedigree, he averaged 105 in the SANFL under 18s in 2020, and he's just always been a fantasy type. He's listed as a defender in fantasy this year, so that makes it pretty handy. I think he's going to be most likely eyeing off a permanent wing role, if not this season, at some stage throughout his career. But even if he remains the backline, he's still going to be a good fantasy scorer. I feel he just plays the right type of game for fantasy. Second year, so we can overhype these second year players a little bit. Sometimes they see a bit of regression, but I think long term, Caleb Poulter's one to look at. What do you reckon, Dos?
Yeah, the thing the point you make about regression is probably interesting in the fact that you do see that quite a bit when players have an awesome role in their first year and then
don't get the same.
You've got to do all the improvement has to be on your own performance, has to get better, and you've got AFL teams who've now scouted you, they know where you want to go, that sort of thing. I don't know though, with Poulter I still see a fair bit of upside because he didn't have the role the whole time, and he's got that scoring pedigree as a junior. I actually didn't know that until I looked into it recently, and I was like, oh, this guy's been a scorer his whole life. So I was kind of surprised when he started, hitting a ton in his rookie year. And I was like, wow, this guy can actually score. So I really like him as a long-term prospect. Defensive status this year, he could be super relevant.
Absolutely. Yeah, he's got a fantasy game, so let's watch and see what happens. But yeah, long-term, I think he's going to be a really good scorer for us, so get on board, Poulter.
Pies are so hard to read, though. New coach.
Absolutely.
Everything's such a preseason watch more than a lot of teams.
Absolutely.
Is the Pies.
Yep. Anyways, we'll move on. Trent Bianca is my next player I'm going to talk about. He got to debut last year after a tricky 2020 with COVID, meaning in 2020 he couldn't really strut his stuff at reserves level. Then he was injured in the 2021 preseason. So just as he was fit and firing, looking ready to go, got injured again. So he took a while to get into it, and he didn't set the world on fire last season, but he showed glimpses last year, especially that round 20 game against West Coast where he snagged a couple goals and scored 84 fantasy points. I reckon we're going to see a lot more of that this season. So looking back at his junior fantasy scores, he averaged 103 in the NAB League in his draft year playing as a midfielder. Also played in the halfback flank a little bit, but his natural position was as a midfielder. But I think he's listed as a forward in fantasy this year. So that's really interesting. And I guess because it's in the back half of the season, he played up forward. But I looked at the Collingwood website a few months ago, and there was an article up there saying, basically reviewing all their first year players or people that debuted. And the article said he's going to step into the shoes of Scott Pendlebury eventually.
Ooh.
So that's big raps there. So that might mean that this is obviously the media team writing this, but
probably before Lipinski arrived as well.
Maybe, yes,
yeah,
perhaps.
definitely.
But yeah, look, they obviously rate him as a midfielder, so I think that's where he's going to play long term. So I think if you can get him in a transition year where he's listed as a forward or a DPP player, and then he moves into that midfield, that's the perfect time to grab him. But nonetheless, I think as a long term prospect, he's someone you want to be hanging on to. It's his third year as well, which we all know is breakout season. So, Trent Bianca, thoughts?
I like him as a defender or a mid, and as a forward, which he played late in the season. It was gross.
I was going to say, don't worry. Yes,
so he's got the forward status. So it's like, yes, if I see him as a defender or a midfielder, I'm keen this year. If he's playing forward like he was late in last year, and like they were trying to tee him up to, if he's that Pendles, then yeah, get on board. If he's looking like he's playing forward, I wouldn't touch him.
Yeah, I'm the same. But like in a keeper league, you've just got to stash him away because he will have
moved.
Oh yeah,
as a deep stash, yes, but I wouldn't. Unless he's in that role this year, I wouldn't expect much this year is what I'm saying.
Yep. All right, they're the three players I'd look at for Collingwood. Because Kaes isn't here, Kaes was supposed to be taking care of Collingwood, but obviously he's not with us tonight, so we did 3 each. So this is Dossie's 3 that he reckons are worth looking at for keeper leagues.
Yeah, the first one I'm looking at is Isaac Quaynor. And I got to admit, I thought he was actually going to be someone that was looking like 2G for P, and then I saw the average, I was like, oh, he only averaged 69.9.
Yeah.
I just thought, I don't know, it was just times last year where he looked really, he looked good.
Yeah.
He passed the eye test. So anyway, 69.9, still not 2G for P, which we'll mention what 2G for P is, Heff too.
Too good for the podcast. So basically right now, anyone that averaged essentially, anyone that's basically one of the top 150 scorers, which is around the 80 average mark, they're too good for the podcast, which means we don't talk about them. So for new listeners out there, 2G4P means too good for the podcast, which means they are too good to be talked about in this podcast.
Yeah, they'll be being kept then, not going to be available for you to draft.
No point talking about them.
All right. He broke out in that footy sense last season, but for his fantasy game, I think this year might be the time he takes it to another level. So he's part of that ridiculous draft class of 2018, which just always excites me. Every player in that draft is just going to be a superstar, apparently. But after coming off 20 games in 2021, I think it's really time for that consistency in his scoring to start emerging. So, he's finally strung some games together. Last year, he got scored in the 90s 3 times and 4 times in the 80s. So now it's just getting that consistency. And as a classy user off half back, I'm just wondering, does Craig McRae want the ball in his hands a bit more this year? Is it time to sort of stray away from your other guys? Who's going to move in and out of the back line? It's such a weird dynamic because you've got Darcy Moore, Jeremy Howe coming back in.
Yeah.
But they're talking about Maynard or Chris maybe going into the guards. It's a weird dynamic. I just think Quaynor's got that natural improvement in him. So, I'm thinking, I hate doing averages at this time of year, but I reckon he goes at least 75 to 80 this year.
Yeah, from memory, I remember him being described as a quality over quantity type player back as a junior scorer. So that's something that kind of put me off him initially. But we saw glimpses last year, as you mentioned, that there is some fantasy game there. And it kind of looked like there was just as much quality as there was quantity in a way, because I think the quality was probably overhyped, as in comparison to how many, disposals he actually got as well. So there were games where he actually looked like he could be a fantasy scorer. So I'm willing to give him a chance. But yeah, it's been flagged from the start that he might not just be a big possession getter, that's all. So yeah, that's just one thing to think about.
It is one thing to think about. Just, you got to remember there's a lot of possessions going out of that team this year with the greatest player of all time, Chris Mayne, retiring at season's end.
That's true. Someone's going to pick them up.
That's right.
There was a bit of chat. Actually, no, we'll talk about it in the listener question later, so don't worry.
All right, next player then, Finlay Mccrae, and what a name to talk about, Mccrae. Everyone loves it in fantasy circles. He's just the type of player, though, based on his numbers. If you just ignore his last name, based on his numbers, is the type of player that I really like from a second-year breakout potential. So a guy that hasn't had the role necessarily in the first year, and also a guy that scored well when he's got the role, which didn't happen too much last year, but when he did get the role, it looked good. So he came out actually okay in his first game, if memory serves, but it was only in one quarter. It was like the last quarter against the Eagles, he came out and got 30-odd points, but he only finished on a 50 or something. So just looking at those sort of bits and pieces. But the role that I like, centre bounce attendances and time on ground. So obviously super low time on ground for him and barely any centre bounces for the season, but when he went in there, he could score. So in his final 5 games of the season, once Big Bob came in as coach, he had a 46% attendance rate. So there's actually a lot of growth there even still if you think he's going to take the next level this year. Obviously, we've mentioned a lot of midfielders coming in. Last 3 games.
A new coach. Well. Just chucking young players in.
I think the big thing is though as well, you just look at the pipes. I think we saw him on the socials this week. Gee whiz, the pipes are looking huge. I think we saw a crop from Kaes with your head on it.
Is there anything you do besides just looking at players' pipes in the photos?
They are quite impressive, Finns. Finns are quite impressive. But anyway, in his last 3 games, he exceeded 67% on the centre bounces and was just looking really good. So I was looking at his points per minute. This is the last thing. Points per minute, 0.86 points per minute from rounds 19 to 21. So I like to cherry pick my stats. But he was that's better than Clayton Oliver's rookie year points per minute.
Oh, here we go.
It's a 3-game sample, but it's a 3-game sample. I just think if he does get the role, he'll go big, but I'm not expecting him to get the role.
Yeah, I'm expecting him to get opportunities, but nothing permanent. I think this is going to be a real test year for Collingwood where they're going to see who's got it and who doesn't. They'll try different people in at different times. They'll probably lose quite a few games. I reckon they're not going to be super high on the ladder, but it'll be just a year of kind of testing things out and finding which players are made to play certain roles and things like that.
And then there just could be a stretch where he goes and averages you a nice amount of points. You know?
The thing is, he's a bloody Mccrae. You cannot write that off, can you?
You can't.
Especially when he's getting a bit of midfield time. I know it's skewed because the season was done and dusted, caretaker coach trying things out. New coach comes in, you can't guarantee the same numbers, but yeah, as I said, he's a Mccrae, which makes it very, very hard to overlook him, that's for sure.
Now, you didn't believe me on the Isaac Quaynor jump in stats, but maybe you'll take note of this guy here who is absolutely not being talked about at all in fantasy circles, Trey Ruscoe.
Yep.
Okay. You haven't cringed yet, which I'm really happy with. You've got an open mind there, Heff.
Yeah.
Anyway, but he basically struggled to find his feet at AFL level last year, early in the season, and in his first year too. So that was his second year last year. Basically, a shift to defence just changed that. It happened in the VFL, then he moved up to AFL level, taking a little spot. I think it might have been when Chrissy Mayne got injured or something, but in his last little bit of the season, he was back up the AFL playing in defence, and his best performance came in round 20 when he got 22 disposals, 19 kicks, 9 marks, 3 tackles, 5 rebound 50s, but then 102 fantasy points. So he turned up last year in a game. I just reckon they've got a spot for him down there, I think. You know, they're always got these weird injuries that happen in the back line. They're talking about moving Maynard and Crisp out. I do have a lot of questions. We've talked about the defensive line that I just don't know who's fitting in there. They played Jack Madgen 18 games last year.
Yeah.
Come on. He plays ahead of Jack Madgen.
I don't know. Jack Madgen was probably one of their better kind of pressure defenders, I guess. So it's kind of a bit of a different role, I guess, type thing.
Yeah. Anyway, I really like his ratty mullet too. I just thought I'd throw it out there. But look, fantasy-wise, I think he could actually have a little role there, and he actually scored quite well as in the waffle as an underager. So yeah,
I'm not sold on him. He's just got the kind of the rigor for AFL level just yet. I want to see a bit more out of him, but yeah, you put a few decent points there. You know, something that kind of pique your interest there. So
thank you.
I don't mind that one. Any special mentions?
I've just got one, and it's based on a theory that I've been working on for the last few years. I think I've shared this with you before. It's the amount of time the social teams at a club put into one player.
Okay.
The amount of Oliver Henry content I'm seeing from Collingwood, it's quite a lot.
Okay.
Meaning fantasy breakout inbound.
Well, last year you had Taron Thomas in the same mould. A lot of preseason fantasy content. Look what happened there.
Yeah. So you just think about it. The people that are around them, the coaches are like, hey, look at this person. Like the social team's like, oh, yeah, let's take a few photos here, take a few photos here. I would love to get, you know how we've got a lot of listeners and a lot of people in the fantasy community all about their graphs and stats. There's a lot more this year. I feel there's a lot more graphs going around this year. Let's get a social media tally of each club, and only the ones that go up on Twitter say, and which players are featuring in them. I want to see the graphs, and Oliver Henry, I've got to say, is up there. But anyway, from an actual fantasy perspective, I watched him play in the VFL randomly last year. So, I used to like keeping tabs on my Fiorini.
Yep.
And I saw him play in the VFL, really super raw, but one of those guys that's just always in the right spot. I do actually think long-term Henry could be one of these guys you stash away and is actually a really good forward in the future. I just wanted, it's a dynasty type pick.
Yep.
Don't think he'll do much this year. Dynasty-wise, Oliver Henry, just keep your eye on him.
All right, there's one special mention from Dossie, Oliver Henry featuring in the social media posts, and one to keep your eye on, therefore.
Let's get a graph going. Let's get a graph.
Anyways, you got to look at the Dons, so we'll move on to them next.
See the bombers fly up.
All right, for those watching the stream, I made a special point of using the 150th year logo.
I was like,
That's the
logo?
150th year. So, generally when a team does that, they ended up sticking with it. Like Port Adelaide did one for their 150th, and stuck with it. So,
Going the extra mile.
And Collingwood did it too the other year, whatever their milestone was. I think it was pretty similar. They stuck with it too. So it probably will end up being their new logo. But anyway.
Guess you got to watch the stream to get those beautiful visuals then.
Or just keep tabs of what Essendon are doing. But anyway, let's get stuck into it, Dossie. What do you got for us?
Well, Jai Caldwell is probably the most obvious person from a keeper's perspective that I'm going to talk about. I still think a lot of people will be keeping him, even though he does come under that, under our kind of
I've got
2G
him.
for P.
He's not 2G for P.
No, sorry, he doesn't come into that.
Oh, yeah,
but
yeah.
I think a lot of people will be keeping him.
I've got him in my team, and I'm keeping him.
Yeah.
Yep.
I do think that. So, and I don't blame you, but I'm still going to talk about him because he's not technically in that top 150
he's
like we
fine.
talk about.
He's right in our wheelhouse, our wheel bag, as the draft doctors would say.
So only the 3 games last year, which obviously coming straight over from GWS, everyone was expecting a huge breakout. We kind of saw the start of that. Tons up in his first game in pretty low time on ground too. I like to talk about my time on ground. It was against the Hawks, but it was a ton nonetheless. Second game was looking pretty good too, and then basically gets injured. Now, if you look at, I'm going to talk about a lot of players here where basically round 2's the game changer. They lost Caldwell, Shield and Draper, I think, in round 2.
Yep, against Port Adelaide.
It was all against your boys.
I was there.
Cruise to a W, I'm guessing?
We did. Smashed him. I watched Jai Caldwell do his hamstring right in front of me.
Yeah.
And I was just devastated.
Right in front of me?
Exactly.
Right, well, anyway, scoring-wise, though, looked the goods. And the thing that excites us most with him is that they rushed him back to get him to play in the elimination final. That's how highly they really rate this guy.
Yep.
The problem is now when he went down, he was basically, they were penciling him in as a centre bounce rotation. They're like, okay, we've got these 3 guys plus Caldwell is our number 1 off the bench. When he went down, they brought in Parrish, who exploded.
Yep.
And this was when Shield and Caldwell both went down at the same time. Parrish just obviously explodes. Does that dynamic change? Then you had Stringer come in too. So it was like Stringer and Parrish basically took those roles and really looked good for them.
Yeah.
Is it still there for him? I'm on the camp of saying I went back and forth all weekend, Heff, thinking about this.
Yep.
I think he's absolutely straight back in that role. If you watch the first quarter of the elimination final, Caldwell was like best on. He's got some serious skills. So I'm excited about this year from him. Mid only, you wish you kept that forward status for 1 year.
Never happen, but yeah.
You wish you kept it for 1 year so you could have had that awesome year last year. Mid only, I still think he's going to be a really good player. It's just ceiling, I'm interested to see where it goes, but I'd be keeping.
A couple of years ago, the year he actually got drafted at GWS, it was looking like he was going to come straight into that midfield. And that was when GWS's midfield was shit hot, before a few people left. And, then they were just looking, I think it was the year they made the grand final or the year after, either or. And all reports were he was going to move straight in the midfield, but got injured again in preseason. It was out for 6-7 weeks type thing. I think it was another hamstring or knee or something like that. Seems to be a little bit injury prone for mine. Did get a good run at the end of last year at GLS, but then comes to Essendon and obviously gets injured. The injury concern is what I'm trying to get at here. It's a worry. But if he can get a run on, get a few games under his belt and actually kind of show us what he can actually do in terms of fantasy, I think he's going to be a gun. But he just needs to stay fit and get it done, basically.
Absolutely. The other thing about him, unfortunate for me when I was doing some of this research, really low on the social media graph.
Oh, shit.
Yeah.
That's no good.
Not being used a lot.
Yeah.
It's kind of just concerning.
He was used a lot last year, though, so maybe they're just trying to keep him under the radar.
Fresh content.
Yeah.
All right. I really like him, though, next year. Dylan Shield is our next player I'm talking about. And this guy took me so long to figure out where I want to put this guy, if I rate him or don't rate him, basically.
Yeah.
I didn't realise how consistent he'd been as just a fantasy scorer, right? So he'd have 90 plus for essentially 7 straight years before last year. He had one season at 89, which I'm just going to bump up to a 90. So 90 plus for 7 straight years. Will he get back to there? I just want your opinion quickly before I go through my points.
I just don't know where he fits in the midfield anymore.
Yeah.
Like, that's the biggest concern. Now, Essendon were terrible for so long, and now they actually look pretty good. And that midfield actually rolls kind of deep now. Like, there's 3 or 4 or 5 names that can actually roll through there and actually perform pretty well. When I think of those names, Shields not near the top of that list, nowhere near. So,
this is where I started thinking, and I've kind of come back to more thinking he is just going to be straight back in the guts.
Okay.
Because when I was looking at the numbers, I was like, what did Rutten do when he came back? Like, where did he put him in the midfield? And you had pretty much a full strength team apart from Caldwell, right? Like in the midfield, I'm talking. So he comes back, he gets around the 64%, 57% centre bounce attendance, is kind of raising it up. And then in his last game, I think it was that 57% where he got 86.
that was in the final.
That was in the elimination final, was his best kind of return game.
Yep.
I just see the scenario where they go Merritt, Parrish, Shield, and then Caldwell was that first guy coming in. And then you've got a stringer rotation that comes in for that burst and plays a fair bit more forward.
Yep.
That's just where I landed. And I might be completely wrong, but that's kind of where I went. And then you've got, your rookies like your Hobbs and your Perkins coming second year. Langford just plays forward, I reckon.
Yeah, okay.
That's just where I landed. I was like, because Shield, I don't think has many other strings to his bow apart from pure mid.
Yeah.
And
Whereas
that's just
someone
where
like
I
Langford, you could toss forward.
That's kind of where I landed with it. I'm interested to see, like you, where they go with it. The thing that I did like as well, he just came, I think, second or something in a time trial. Like Dylan Shields. So fit. Yep. He's back and fit and fine.
We all know time trials equate to fantasy points. So,
they do. Yeah. Well, just to see his body and he's fit and healthy.
Yeah.
Like he's ready to go. Anyway, that's where I landed on that. I think he can still be a decent scorer.
Danny Haggerty in the chat has gone, Shield is back with a big exclamation mark at the end. So that sold me there. Now, you do make some good points. I think the fact that they used him so much in the final, and like you said, there's probably not many other places that he's going to play well. They'd be crazy not to use him in midfield if they use him at all, but you assume he's still best 22, so that's where he's probably going to play. So I reckon he's a player that you might be able to get a little bit on the cheap.
Yeah,
this year.
I think that's where I landed. I started thinking, I was like, okay, this guy's like, I'm not in it at all.
Yeah.
Just looked into it and I'm like, I think he actually could be value. So that's where I finished. And I also just noted, I reckon this is, guys, we can't talk about him on the pod, I don't think, but Mccrae, I think, is literally going to be the next Gus Brayshaw in the sense that he's got so much fantasy potential.
Yeah.
But he's going to be stuck on the wing because he's the only guy that can still do that out of the guys that can play inside.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So hopefully he can get back in there. But yeah, Brayshaw's going to be inside anyway this year, mate. So anyway.
Sam Draper is the next guy and yet another player that went down in that dreaded round 2 against your boys. But he's shaping up as this one's shaping up as a breakout season for Sammy D. Started the season with a 78 against the Hawks, came back from injury again against the Hawks, and he came back round 14, so it was a long way off. Gets the 83. The big thing for him, though, was the elimination final.
Sorry, can I just jump in here? Danny Haggerty's got back on the chat. He's actually, I've misread it because the font's so small. He actually said he's a hack. He's not back. Sorry, continue.
Yeah, I was a bit surprised somebody was getting around him as well, to be honest. But anyway, Draper, 121 fantasy points off 18 disposals with 12 kicks. 5 marks, 4 tackles, 44 hit-outs. Yes, it was against the Dogs, who put out a menacing ruck combination of Lewis Young and Tim English. So plenty of hit-outs to be had. But 2022, I just think this guy, he's going to get a full season, hopefully, touch wood. I'm touching wood. And I think he's going to be really good.
There's actually a question about Sam Draper later on, but I'll kind of answer it now. And it's basically, do you hold Sam Draper on the back of a couple other ruckmen? The thing I had to look at was just his around the ground work. Like, the guy can't kick, essentially. Kicking efficiency was around 50%. Then I looked at which ruckman had the best kicking efficiency out of the whole year, and it was Nick Bryan. So one game, very small sample size, but like that's just one thing I had to look at. And like the stats from his one game compared to Draper's average weren't like too much difference in terms of like efficiency and kicking and disposals and things like that. So that's just one like little devil's advocate thing there.
Yeah.
And they seem to rate Brian hugely as well. So
okay, you can be on that side. I think this guy nearly signed a multi-million-dollar deal
True.
with St Kilda, and they were doing everything to keep him. So
Yeah, true.
I think Draper's their number one choice. Nick Bryan does look like a really good ruck, but maybe they play a dual ruck down the line.
He's fine. In terms of actual rucking, fine, but there's not a player that they're going to want him using the ball at all around the ground. So you're going to...
I think he's like a mummy. He's Shane Mumford 2.0 because you look at his frees against are probably going to be like Mumford as well. I don't see him as like a... I mean, he got 121, which is amazing upside. But I don't see him as like a huge fantasy scorer this year at least. But look, the guy's 23. I think people can't sometimes forget he's kind of played a few years. He's just been injured. So
no, I'm not. I don't want like this is the Keeper League podcast. You're gonna have to play a ruckman. Some team is gonna have to play a ruck like Sam Draper. It's not the end of the world. He'll be probably a top. If you play in a 12-team Keeper League, he'll probably be a top 12 ruckman at some stage. So he might have even been last year. I don't know, but. Anyway, he's going to be a player that someone's going to use the number one ruck and he'll be serviceable and he'll be fine. It's just that I think if you're starting up a new Keeper League, I think a lot of people will go for him because of his age profile and things like that. Whereas I reckon maybe you should probably target someone who's going to score you a few more fantasy points because I guess the ruck list might be a little bit deeper.
I just think the difference between, say, he and like, your Ned Reeves type of player that you're looking at, say, in a keeper, Draper, for me at least, is... They've got their infrastructure, Heff, where they're gonna roll with one ruck because you've got a Peter Wright that can chop out, say, right. Okay. Whereas these guys, a lot of other teams that have young rucks that are potential superstar young rucks, like your Tim English, who we've seen, it's like, is he ever even going to get in the ruck again now?
Yeah,
and a guy like Jackson, who's going to be a superstar, but not till Gawn retires, right?
Yeah,
Draper's the number one ruck, so that's the where you can sort of rest your argument.
They might even play two rucks, so there might be a two ruck trend that everyone else seems to be employing at the moment. So we'll have to wait and see what happens there. But anyway, move on.
Sam Durham.
Another Sam.
Yeah, Sam Durham. This is a loose one from Dossie.
I love
a
loose
one from Dossie. It's pretty much the eye test from me. I just thought this guy was so poised when he came in. Look, he took the wing role off of Nick Cox at the end of the year, and which is something I'm going to talk about Cox in a second, but like it's a pretty big effort to be able to do that. Kaes, obviously the Essendon man, said, look, Nick Cox was just cooked. Durham, he's not huge on Durham, but old Dossie is, and I'm going to talk about him anyway. So obviously fantasy perspective, the numbers don't back me up.
Yeah.
55 in the AFL, 55 and 67 in the VFL because he played for two different VFL sides because he got the mid-season draft.
Yep.
I just saw something about him, and I really just think he's AFL standard. I think he'll be best 22.
Okay. I'm not sure if he's best 22. I couldn't even picture him right now, so I'm not really sure on that one, Dossie. It's one of your more loose picks, but I'll take your word for it. All right.
Just his moments are really good. I think he can string them together. Yep. Let's see. He's got some marking upside. Nick Cox, let's talk about him now. The unicorn was the word used all the time.
Yep.
I'll use it again. He's a unicorn.
Okay.
80% time on ground, a guy that can, and that's including, by the way, a medical sub game. So this guy can run all day, plays huge time on ground numbers, even if it's on the wing, won the time trial last year, this sort of stuff. Just massive tank, huge, obviously.
Quite tall,
as always mentioned, but just his role that I don't think we've seen someone of his height be used in this role. Wing, obviously. Can chop out in the ruck, which I thought he was awesome. I'm a bit quick with this one, but I think a guy that you don't know where his career is going. Like Absolutely. He's shown a ceiling. He's already tonned up. He had 93 in round 4, 83 in round 10, and 104 in round 12 with big mark numbers, even getting in as a chop out ruck. I just think huge dynasty type pick. Don't know how he's going to go, in the next couple of years, but I just would love to be there for the ride. So
what's your gut feel on where he ends up? What position does he play, or is he just going to be a pure utility?
I think he's going to just be like a 200 centimetre west off with actual more fantasy potential.
Kind of like, I guess, I don't know if this is a good comparison, but like Goddard could go forward, back, kind of do everything, play in the guts, like that sort of thing.
I like my Hoff comparison, a bit better.
Fair enough. Goddard's probably a little bit a better player, but anyway.
But I reckon the best scenario is if he gets to play, say, on a wing like he did last year as he develops that role, a wing and then chopping out in the ruck. Like I'd love to see a 70% wing, 30% ruck. I'd just be like, that would be frothing because he actually...
Does anyone have the tank to do it? That's a huge tank. tank.
Well, he does have a huge tank.
I know, but is it that big?
He could play. The thing is, as a ruckman, he played essentially as an extra mid.
Yeah,
and
okay. Yeah, true,
he played all right as a mid. So
Yeah.
who knows? The first 200 centimetre inside mid.
I don't know. Splitting between the wing
Like
and
I
the
said,
ruck seems quite
just
tiring.
the upside of the anything factor, like just he could be anything.
Yeah.
That's where I'd just be like, dynasty pick, lock it in every year, just see how it goes.
You're not going to go super early on him because you're not sure where the fantasy scoring is going to be over the next 3 or 4 years, but he's going to be serviceable when he
I just want to see where it goes.
All right, cool. Be along for the ride. Sometimes you've got to take players that you just want to watch as well. You just want to make them your boy.
I do.
See how they go.
Yeah,
Yep.
I'm excited. I wonder I'd love to know what Kaes thinks about him long term. Like,
we'll have to ask him next week when he's back on the show.
We'll have to. Mason Redmond. Always talk about Mason Redmond.
Yeah.
68 average. I reckon that sells the man short as to his fantasy potential. Finished the season really strong. So 96, 102, 76 in his last 3. That I think includes the elimination final. So 91 average in his last 3. Just, he went 75 or more on 8 occasions in 2021. That's your keeper. That's your D6 kind of, even D5 or something kind of guy that you want to field in your team.
He was my first defender choice, I think, in 2 of my leagues. So, sorry, reserves, bench choice. That's what I mean.
And if you had a round 23 grand final, he got you 102.
Yes, I think I had him on the bench for that as well.
Yeah. So anyway, the other side of it, below 55 times. So consistency, again, is not there, but he's got one of the better kicks at Essendon. So he's only just behind Jordan Ridley and Jaden Laverde as the best peg with that 80% efficiency. And he also started taking kick-ins, which actually annoyed a lot of Ridley owners because Redmond started taking some kick-ins off him. So he's actually got that little bit of mix of kick-ins, can get the ball himself, that sort of thing. So I just like him. He's coming into that sort of age bracket, mid-20s, where, he could go 80 plus potentially if there's enough ball to go around in the back line.
Yeah, I think he does kind of come into that D5 range a bit more this season. It depends like what kind of role he has to play, and that can change week to week with someone like Mason Redmond. He does have a bit of height to him, can play lockdown and things like that, but also he can free himself up and kind of, get a few kicks as well and stuff like that. So he's going to be a roller coaster player, I think, but it'll average out to be an okay D5 kind of 70, mid-70s average that we should take on field each week if you can get it. So,
yeah, and he only got that kick-in sort of role halfway through the season or something like that. So if he just keeps that from the start, you could probably see a little bit less of that floor that he's, known that the floor kind of holds him back. So anyway, Mason Redmond was my 6th player. Just got quick special mention for Archie Perkins, who some Essendon fans are probably like, where's he at? I really like him long term, and I liked a lot what I saw. He's obviously come back and smashed the time trial, which kind of scared me into not putting him on this list. He's got forward status. Just don't think there's that enough. We've just talked about the stacked midfield. Where's he going to fit in that midfield? Yeah,
I can't see him. I can't see him moving into a permanent midfield role. I think he'll just roll through again this year, kind of fill in, chop and change in there. I think probably 2 or 3 more years until he kind of moves into it.
Stash-wise, love it.
Yeah, exactly. I've got him on my rookie list in my league. So, yeah. I'm really copping on the chat with these shorts I'm wearing tonight. So, I'm actually wearing my boardies because they're the last pair of clean shorts I had. So, people ask me if they're Speedos and things like that. So,
no, quite short.
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't really think when I was putting these on that would be an issue on the podcast. But anyway, and Nick Carlson saying he's keeping Nick Cox purely for the dick jokes in the chat. So, keep that going as well.
Fair enough.
Anyways, should we move on to Fremantle?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. All right, on to the Purple Haze. Fremantle will get stuck in straight away. So this first guy, we've talked about a bit, I think, on a few members-only podcasts this year. That's Hayden Young. So
great name.
Hayden Young, yes. Spelled a bit differently to yours. I didn't write it with a Haydn. I put the E in there this time. But it's
Get rid of that E.
All right, sorry, I'm distracted now. Let's talk about Hayden Young. All right, it's breakout season for this guy is what I want to say, Dossie, all right? The kid is an absolute jet. He only averaged 66.1 last season, but he's been hampered by injuries in his first 2 seasons. Finally got a decent run of games together at the end of 2021. Averaged 90 from his last 3, had 79.2 from his last 5. That was his average there. Had a top score of 93 throughout the years. That is one thing I do have questions about is his ceiling in terms of fantasy scoring. So even throughout juniors, he was known as probably one of the best users coming out of this draft, one of the best kicks going around, but he still couldn't put up a massive score in his junior year either. Averaged 85 in the NAB League and 84 in the Under-18 Championships in that draft year. So either way, he's one of the best users in the I guess, to come out of the draft in recent years, really. So he's a player that Fremantle are going to want to have the ball in his hands. The other thing is as well, he just reads the play exceptionally well. I was just watching a few highlights the other day just as I was doing prep for this show. Just the way he kind of drops off his, his opponent will make a lead, but he'll just have his eyes on the ball and just drop into the hole and just take a, super easy intercept mark and things like that. Just reads it exceptionally well, just kind of has the knack of knowing where the next kick's going to be, all that sort of stuff as well. So on the back of that, being a great ball user, they're going to want the ball in his hands, and the way he can kind of read the play and intercept it, he's going to find a lot of footy, I think. And Fremantle are just going to want the ball in his hands. So I'm getting on board Hayden Young for this year. Spells his name more superiorly than you. But what do you think?
Excuse me. I really like it. I really like him. The thing that I'd be questioning from the, excuse me, fantasy ceiling type thing would be another guy that we're talking about that's going to be talking about later. I wonder whether if he didn't come, the breakout would be 100% on, and whether it's hampered at all from that. But I really like Hayden Young. And I think I don't really care when defenders that are great ball users don't necessarily hit huge fantasy scores in juniors when they play the role that Hayden Young does, because when they get to AFL level, the strategy is get the ball in this guy's hands. Yeah. Whereas as juniors, you don't get to that sort of level of strategy. So I really do think that eventually he'll, especially when kind of they prefer him over Luke Ryan, if they do, for kick-ins and stuff, huge. I reckon the ceiling is going to be there.
Yeah, I could see him. I could see him being a low 100 average defender eventually. Not this year, perhaps. I reckon he might bump his numbers up to 80, 85 average this year, progress to the 90s, eventually kind of hit the ceiling at about 100 average, defender. Kind of like a lesser kind of Jake Lloyd.
The thing is, you're going to be incredibly lucky if someone drops this guy to your draft.
He's stuck in there. This is probably more for people that's starting up, where to take him, because I guess the average of 66 does bump him down a little bit when you're looking at the kind of auto-filled ranks and things like that. But yeah, he's someone you're going to want to bump up your draft board, I think.
Be interesting where we put him in our ranks next week.
Yeah, I think I've got him quite high as well.
I will be as well.
May even be top 20 for me. I think he's on the cusp.
I'd have to wait until I start my ranks, but he'll be very high for me as well.
Sign up as a member to get those defender ranks next week. You'll find out all about it if he makes the top 20. All right, we just had a question in the chat. Is Schultz a keeper? And I'm going to talk about him next. So Lockie Schultz, hopefully this can help you make your decision there, Jason Beck. So anyway, we love Lockie Schultz in the podcast. He's just a little keeper league battler. Not the fanciest player, never going to be the biggest fantasy scorer, the kind of player that's dropped back to the pool each year, but you pick him up and he sits on your bench and he comes on every now and then and scores you a big ton. We don't mind him. He does a few nice things, puts up a few good scores here and there. He only averaged 58 last season, but he had a top score of 119 in round 2. He also turned up in round 10 against Sydney as well. So he also had 2 separate scores of 85. So he can show you can put up a few good scores here and there. I think he had a few low ones in there too. He's not a player you'd want to trust on the ground each week, but he's got a bit of spark. And I think I just like him as a streamer option, just a guy that you chuck on your bench and can go big every now and then, kick a few bags. We think Fremantle will be on the up as well this year, so he could play a part in that as well, especially in their forward line. I say streaming Fremantle players, it can be hard to stream Fremantle players because they play a lot of Sunday afternoon games. They're the last games of the round generally, so you need someone to play after them to actually loophole them on. So it's a bit hard otherwise, but if they play away, you can kind of loophole them a fair bit. But yeah, when he pops up and puts a good score up, he might be a good loophole option. But he's just good cover as well because he plays most weeks as well. So not the pretty player. Kaes and I have this joke about who would be on the front cover of the Keeper League video game, or just like the player, and it's just never going to be the best guy. Lockie Schultz would be a contender, I reckon, just a battler. So I don't know if I'd be keeping him. Depends on how many deep you can stash him. But he's a player that you pick up that's just fills your bench, plays each week. If you get a raft of injuries, he's someone at least you've got a warm body on the field. I'm just off most
small forwards. I think
same,
just medium-sized forwards and above for me, unfortunately. But I do like Schultz actually as a player as well, and he does resemble Peter Malark from the Hunger Games very closely as well, which is a factor for your keeper.
Oh yes, I know who you're talking about now. Yes, I know that guy. Yep, because I've never seen that, but I know the comparison. Yes. Look, on small forwards, I'm with you. I don't love relying on them, but I love owning them for when they pop. So when you get one on as a streamer or as a loophole option, I love having him for that because you're someone like Charlie Cameron just kicks 5. And then
he's like Tom Papley light to me.
Yeah,
and
true.
Tom Papley's ceiling was only like 80, which, I mean,
it's
pretty
not
good
big.
for
Like
a keeper league.
Never want to start them on the field, but I want to have them on my bench just in case they kick a bag.
Yeah,
essentially.
Sounds good.
Anyway, let's get on to Will Brody, a name that is on a lot of the listeners' lips. Another new recruit for Fremantle. So he's coming across from Gold Coast. And Brody was a player that always excited so many. He averaged 88 in 2019, and many thought he was going to be the next big thing in fantasy. Was given forward status after that year too. People were so excited about him, but just couldn't get a game under Stewie Jew. He got Jude.
Bloody Stewie
He got Jude. And like when he did play, he just didn't see much time on ground either. I think he'll see an immediate bump on that time on ground factor at Fremantle, though. I had a look into this. I think at Fremantle, only 2 players last year played under 70% time on ground as an average. So, yeah, so they kind of tend to keep players on the ground.
I love a good time on ground stat.
I know you do.
That was one.
That one, yeah.
Very impressed.
But yeah, Will Brody averaged 56 in 2020, 51 in 2021. So didn't live up to those heights of 2019. But yeah, we think he'll average more in 2022. Longmuir has said he's been recruited to play as an inside mid. But I also think he's probably a good fit. I know it's probably not his natural role because he does go forward a bit as well. But I think he could slot into a wing as well if they need him to play there. I think there's a wing spot opening and they're kind of trialling a few blokes there as well. I'd rather see him as an inside mid, but I don't think he'd be out of place there either. Because they're wings as well. If you look at it, like James Aish played there a fair bit. Chera was there a bit. So was Brayshaw. I think they want to move Brayshaw inside. Chera, Frederick goes in there. They're not super stacked on the wings, really. So on the outside run. So it could slot in out there, but there's a few other players we'll talk about after this that could go there as well. But the best thing about him, he's got forward status as well. So I reckon he's going to have a big season. If everything goes to plan, I think 80 plus should be the average. I think worst case, you're going to get a 70 average from him, which you take as a forward as well.
Look, Do you
think he's best 22, first of all? Or do you think he'll get given opportunities early at least?
I do, as a person that isn't inside a club. I think he's best 22. Yeah, like I think he's an awesome player. When he gets an opportunity, he showed that he can actually win the footy, and he's pretty. For me, he looks pretty classy inside and can win the ball and contested stuff. It's always just been opportunity for him, and I do think his issue in the fact that he didn't get a game at Gold Coast as well was that he doesn't. So you're talking about a wing. I don't know if he could play that role. I think it's inside or bust for Brody. So that's where I think he sits. Which it's interesting that he got the forward status this year as well, didn't he?
Yeah, because he played a lot of VFL. I suppose he played forward for Gold.
Because he played pure inside at VFL. Because as you know, I watched a few VFL games for Gold Coast, and I was kind of annoyed. I was kind of annoyed because Fiorini would play wing, and Brody would be inside every single time. So he's and dominate.
What are they doing up there? Because then Fiorini comes into the senior side and plays in the guts, and then
that's what I think. I mean, I don't think Brody could have played on the wing.
Yeah, no, fair enough. So, but I'm just saying, like, why do they do that? And then them playing completely different at senior level.
Stewie, it's just the Stewie way.
Anyways.
Sean Lemons was playing inside mid. Let's not forget that, ahead of Will Brody.
All right, cool. Yeah, no, the wing thing, I was just saying, if there's a spot there, someone's got to take. So if he doesn't make it as inside, there might be just a chance that he could still lock down a midfield role of sorts. But anyway, we'll move on because this guy I reckon could slot into a wing, and that's Darcy Tucker. So in 2019, this guy showed heaps of promise. Averaged 72.6, but had some genuinely impressive games in 2019. Notched up a few tons in that season too. Many of the scores in 70s, 80s, 90s marks. And after that year, I think it was Ed Langdon. Was that the Langdon that was at Fremantle?
Yes.
Yes, yeah. So he left, and we assumed he'd jump onto that wing full time. But then Longmuir recruited Aish and played him on the wing instead, which was kind of annoying. Chera kind of went on the wing, Brayshaw they kind of rotate those kind of guys through there. So he got moved back into defence a bit more. And then he's had to play in defence the last couple of years, which I don't think has really suited him. But the reports are, and we love a good preseason report, Dossie, that he's training with the midfield group again. So it looks likely to move back onto that wing. So hopefully we can see that kind of promise we saw him show in 2019. Yes, there's competition for spots at Fremantle at the moment, but I think he could be handy if he could fill a spot there, especially listed as a defender. Probably won't keep that defender status long, but he could make a good D5, D4, D5 option this year if he can play in the midfield and have defender status. Thoughts?
Yeah, it's funny. I actually see him. I see him and Brody basically battling it out for the inside spot.
Okay.
I actually see him more as an inside mid, and I only say that because I think it was when I was actually recording the centre bounces back in the day a few years ago.
Yep.
When he went in there, very, very impressive, and actually a really strong tackler.
Yep.
So I actually kind of think he could be potentially the one that is thrown into the mix. as an inside option.
Okay.
So that, when I see him training with the mids, I'm like, oh, is this guy going to be the kind of like guy that's contending with your Brodies and stuff to get that inside spot over the Mundies and fill the Chera spot after he's left? So
Yeah.
I'm kind of, last year barely got a crack. Round 7, he had 26% attendance, and that's it. So he had one crack during the whole season.
Yeah.
But we've seen him, the guy that I compare him to, I like my comparisons, but he plays a very Elliot Yeo game, like just tackle and big kicks out of the midfield. So like he's got a pretty penetrating kick. So that's the way he kind of plays.
Yeah.
I hope Brody gets the role ahead of him. But
I just reckon I saw in an article where Longview
They're
was
saying
saying
wing?
Yeah, wing. That's all. That's the only thing that made me think that as well. I could be wrong, but I'm sure I read that. But anyway, speaking of wingers, I got one more for you.
Oh, here we go.
This is a bit loose, but it's not super loose. But
This isn't loose.
Liam Henry is the next name I've got on my list.
That's not loose.
He hasn't really done a lot fantasy-wise to date, but he's only averaged 37.8 last season, so playing primarily as a small forward, so could be a bit loose. But the reason he makes this list is another kind of Longmuir article chat. Longmuir loves to talk about player roles, actually.
Yeah, he's emerging as a really good one of these fantasy kind of hype coaches. Yeah. I'm liking it.
Anyway, there's a lot of talk that Liam Henry is going to run onto a wing this season. So reckons his strengths are more suited as a winger. So he's just a player I think we need to add to our watch list this pre-season because he's listed as a forward. We know that forwards are scarce. So he's a player that probably we need to be looking at watching pre-season. If he was playing on a wing, I know he only averaged 37.8 last year, but he could bump that up to a 50. Nah.
Look, sometimes it's all about the role, though. You can see players go from, if they're not playing the right role and they go into a role like a wing, which is very fantasy relevant, then I'd be watching him because I remember being pretty excited about him when he came into the league. Like I think he was an okay junior fantasy scorer, Liam Henry.
No, I think because he was a small forward, I don't think it was super high. I think it was like okay, but I think it was still only like a 70 type thing.
All right.
Yeah, I think. I can't 100% remember.
I hate to break it to you, Heff. You've missed a player.
Have I really? List. Oh, no. Who's that?
Yeah, you missed one of the big ones.
Jordan Clark. Of course I did. I'm saving the best for last, Dossie. Don't you worry. All right, Jordan Clark. So he's coming to Freo from Geelong seeking more opportunity this season. Made the fantasy world go crazy with his Amy Series performance last year. I was at Kaes' wedding, actually. I didn't see it, but... you were doing something for me. You were looking after the time on ground stats or points per minute stats on the website for me. You were uploading those. Yeah. So we were chatting a bit, and you were just absolutely frothing via the group chat. Oh my
god! So, anyway, he looked like Lockie Whitfield.
Yeah. So that's basically what you described him as on the chat, I think, as well. Anyway, he went and averaged 56.4 last season from 8 games. So couldn't lock down a spot in the side, couldn't stay in the side. So and when he did play, he only played low time on ground as well. So he only averaged 69% for the season. So anyway, we think that should bump up. I talked about this before. The time on ground, they don't Longmuir doesn't seem to really kind of restrict time on ground as much as other coaches do and keep other coaches on. They rotate all their players pretty frequently, so you should see a time on ground bump there. He's talked of playing on a halfback flank this year, even though he's listed as a midfield in fantasy. So you kind of wish it was the other way around, but I still don't think it's going to be the worst thing for his output.
He'll get DPP surely.
Yeah, I reckon he will. Yeah, straight one of the first ones up probably. But yeah, it looks like fantasy type. Even though his kind of averages don't suggest it, but he's put up some good numbers in the back end of his debut year, which kind of made everyone get excited. But then Chris Scott decided he just hates playing kids. But yeah, at Fremantle, we're playing the halfback flank. I reckon it should suit him to a T. Get some trust placed in him, and I think the sky's the limit for someone like Jordan Clark.
Get the socials ready, Heff.
Okay.
Jordan Clark is going. Oh, the camera's gone again.
Hold on.
There we go. Jordan Clark is going 90 plus.
Right, cool. We actually got the camera working that time, so I think we just need some heads up with that one. I think the chat got pretty excited when you did that last time, and apologies to the people that are listening because that doesn't really work on the audio medium. Maybe you want to describe what you're actually doing when that happens?
I'm putting on and then taking off some sunglasses and doing a dramatic look, which I hope in post you'll zoom in on the face as well.
Yeah, sure, I'll get it up to scratch, don't you worry. Anyways, that wraps up the Fremantle players. I feel like we're just trying to get jokes in there instead of actually talking up these players.
No, I do actually really like Jordan Clark, and I think I was a massive defender of him last year as well, saying he needs to play more, and then I remember that really heartbreaking moment. I think it was in one of the finals where he has an open shot at goal, like running into a wide open goal and just missed it. And I've just felt so bad for the kid. Like, you know, he's done everything to get there, and he's just, I think, just so much in his own head because the coach doesn't trust him that he's gone and muffed up a big game-changing sort of moment. So anyway, I'm just really looking forward to him to have a fresh slate. The coach obviously trusts him. I think he's going to have a bloody awesome role this year, and I genuinely mean that. I think he'll go and score really well this year.
All right, you heard it here first, even though Dossie's been spruiking it for 3 years. Yep. Get on, Jordan Clark. I agree. I think this is going to be his year. New club, new him. He's going to be a fantasy scorer. Anyways, that wraps up the team analysis, and we'll move on to the listener questions in a second. But we'll just talk about our membership program. So if you enjoy the podcast we put out on a weekly basis, basically sign up as a member and you'll get more of them. We've got bonus episodes up there for our members, but we also have, basically our website is kind of like a stats site as well and a data analysis site as well. Up there at the moment, we have all the draftee fantasy scores and our draftee analysis document. So that's the document that has profiles for every draftee in the competition. So you'll get to know your draftees better than ever, know their fantasy scorers and who are the best ones at scoring your points. We've also got the breakout tracker, which launched just after New Year's Day. And we've got the State League fantasy scores we launched last week. But next week, we start ranking season. So defender rankings are going to be up next week. So make sure you remember to get access to them. So Dossie's getting stuck into his rankings. He's done so many of them.
I have. You'll want to keep an eye on them too.
Yep, you'll see them next week. But yeah, as a I guess thank you to the gold members, because there are 3 different membership categories, but we've got the gold members that sign up. They're the top tier. We say thank you to them each week on the podcast. I'll read them out this week. Dossie, say thank you to the following gold members: Nick Pedden, John O'Hartley, Matt Wright, Parker Reeve, Ben Blake, Mark Chopper Reed. I don't know. I think he died. But anyway, AJS Hawker, Paul Vincent, Mitchell Swan, and Gage Smith. So thank you to those 10 gold members.
Thank you very much.
We'll read out another 10 next week. Dossie, do you want to do the honours and read out the podcast review this week? So.
Sure. This is off the cuff. So at RTS, I'm a super coacher, but your show helps. Your show offers insights into fringe, forgotten, and emerging fantasy players that other podcasts don't. Great for planning future trades and resisting the urge to jump on one-hit wonders, which most fantasy players do. Love 2G 4P. He's written TG for P, or is that you?
We'll out. No, you wrote that.
Okay. I'm into 2 GFs, so it all helps. Thanks very much at RTS.
All right. Thank you, RTS. So, yeah, it's good that here the super coaches are getting something out of it. Hey, Dossie, you did pretty well there. You do have a degree in media, don't you? So you're used to reading off teleprompters. That's all you do each day, right?
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay, cool. Anyways, thank you for that review. I think we've only got a couple more up there, and these are left over from last year. So if you haven't reviewed the show yet on Apple Podcasts, please do that, and we'll read it out in the podcast. But that helps us climb the ranks. Also on Spotify,
you can do the little 5-star thing now.
Rank, so please give us 5 stars on Spotify as well, because I think they'll start using those to bump shows up the charts there as well. But anyway, we'll get stuck now into the listener questions. All right, let's get stuck in. So, just first of all, just apologies. We used to read out everyone's question, basically. Every question that came through, we'd read it out. Unless there was like 3 or 4 that was the same, then maybe we won't. But we just get too many these days that we can't really read them all. The show would go forever. So I tried to pick the ones that just weren't already covered on the podcast. But yeah, we try to get them through them quickly as well, so we're not around for ages. But I thought I'd just put that at the top. But anyway, we'll get stuck in. At Mortarded asks, Collingwood's ruck depth has been sold. Grundy goes down. Who takes the number 1 ruck?
I just think it's Darcy Cameron.
Yeah,
He's the best ruck that's, playing forward. He played pretty well as a forward, but I think it's just simple Darcy Cameron. He dominated as a knee-full ruckman back in the day. He can play ruck. It's him.
Yep. All right. So that's a pretty easy one. What's the next question?
At David 505185535.
Glad you read those out.
Says, who's a bigger chance to gain forward status, Langford or Shield?
I think Langford would have to be, because he's had it in the past. We mentioned it earlier.
Easly Langford.
Shield doesn't really have anything else.
Shield's still going to play centre bounce.
I did actually look at stats just to confirm it. But more shots on goal, more marks inside 50, better goal accuracy, less CBAs, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, so, the thing is, Langford only played there because Shield and Caldwell were
pretty
out.
Much,
and he's the best option. He's pretty tall. Like he'll play forward.
Yeah, exactly. You don't want him to play forward as an owner, but you kind of want him to play enough to get forward status and then go into the midfield. But I guess you're relying on injuries a bit, which you can't do all the time. But Langford is the one that goes forward.
Yeah, I think he's almost going to definitely get DPP.
Yeah. Clive's on the punt. Good handle there. Jeremy Howe to take over from the fantasy-friendly Chris Mayne backline role. What do you think, Dossie?
Did we ever think we'd hear that on a show? The Chris Mayne role. Who's going to take the Chris Mayne role? I love it. I love Chrissy Mayne. Yeah. Oh, so good. I think it's more likely to be spread across a few guys, and I think Jeremy Howe's kind of more going to have to be that, just the interceptor, and I don't know. Maybe he could be the one that does take it. I think it's just going to be split between your Quain or your Roscoe, or maybe that Bianco kind of Poulter. I think we're just going to see it spread across, and then it's just going to be so dependent on who we see in that back six. And look, if they move out Maynard and crisps up the ground as well, then yes, it will be Howe. But I kind of see more of an even spread and, just sharing the love.
Just one thing, I guess, with Howe, as soon as he came back, he just kind of took all the kick-ins as well.
Yeah.
So that's another thing that just adds to his scoring pedigree as well, because I think Maynard was taking a few. There's someone else, I think Mayne as well, was taking a few. When Howe came back, it was just all back to him. So that's
I think, does Moore take quite a few too?
He wasn't up there, I don't think. I think earlier in the year he was, but I think towards the back end when...
I thought he got injured though.
When Howe came back in. That's when, he was kind of taking him in the end. So anyway, next question, Dossie.
At Pat Julia. I know Pat, actually. Yeah. G'day, Pat. Do we see Ridley get a bump with the addition of Jake Kelly?
I think so, because we saw Ridley needing to play a few lockdown roles toward the ends of last year. I think that just frees him up a little bit more, because we saw Ridley actually be a real serviceable fantasy scorer, and then suddenly he just died, and that was because he was actually playing defence.
It's also because Redmond started stealing those kick-ins.
Is that what happened?
It actually was,
a little bit, but I think, he was locking down a bit, because I think the kick-ins did pick up again.
If you want to see the kick-ins, though, at the start of the year, that's when Ridley was going bonkers.
Yeah.
He had, every kick-in, and then he didn't after he came back. So,
yeah. So maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's not as big of a jump as we think it is, because maybe the kick-in was the big factor for his scoring.
I think it was a huge factor in the massive ceiling, and to see him take it up a notch. But
there was definitely some games where he was just locking down, though. He wasn't finding the footy as much. So it will have a bit of a bump, but maybe not back to what it was at the start of last year, unless he's taking those kick-ins
I'd sort of sit in between.
Yeah. All right, next one.
All right, the next one's from Ruxon S. Is this the year for Valente? You didn't mention him. On board?
Didn't get in there.
Not even a special mention.
So last year we went big on him, and I think even last year we put out a bit of a social clip. It was I said, it was something like, "Is this the year of Luke Valente?" And Footy Rhino, one of the great fantasy names, retweeted it just saying yes. And didn't see it. Didn't happen. Yeah. So this year would want to be his year. I just don't know if they're going to try him over highly touted youngsters that they brought in, really. Matthew Johnson, Erasmus, O'Driscoll, just a few of the younger names in there. Brody coming in, Tucker training with the mids. Just needs a lot of things to go right, especially with that body too. Not putting up huge numbers in the waffle either. That's kind of expected for waffle, but wasn't really starring there either. Okay. So I'm not as sold as I was once upon a time for Valente. I think maybe just the body's let him down too much.
I'm not gonna lie. I haven't seen enough of him. At all. Nah. If I get to, maybe I'll have to go look at the waffle tape. Yeah. But
I'll put it out there right now. I don't watch much reserves footy. I'm just looking at numbers.
Yeah.
I'm watching every AFL game. I don't have enough time. I can't do it. But
the guy high on the social charts that you just mentioned, O'Driscoll, getting mentioned a lot in the social medias. I saw him run down Jordan Clark at training.
I think another one. I think it's another one. Longmuir was actually said could be in line for a game early. So. Yeah, loves putting out fantasy little stats. I think I read that. Anyway, next one.
Next one's at Milne_AFF. Is Matthew Johnson a realistic shot at best 22 for round one? And where would you rank him among this year's rookie class from a fantasy perspective?
So, look, the talk is he's ready to go. I think a lot of these kind of youngsters as well, and a lot of this midfield stuff depends on Fife and how his body's going and where he plays as well. Do we see Fife back in the midfield full time, or does he spend time up forward, which then opens a door, especially with Chera gone as well. So if Fife plays up forward, I reckon we could see a rookie slot in there quite early. Yeah. Looking at terms of his fantasy from a fantasy perspective, look, he played 5 Waffle Reserves games for an average of 86 and 4 Waffle Colts games for an average of 92.5. So for Waffle, that's quite good. He's up there. I don't think he made our top 10. but it's not the worst numbers in the world in terms of a fantasy perspective. But I think a lot of it depends on opportunity and the role they get as well. So it looks like he could be in the midfield early. We'll see how he goes. But yeah, there's a bit of talk there.
Yeah, it's all watching and seeing what Longmuir decides to do in these early games, and if you get a sense that he's kind of preferred ahead of I personally would think a Will Brody that's just come there, hopefully ahead. If he's not ahead of Matthew Johnson, he's probably never going to play footy. So you got to look at these guys ahead of the rooks straight off and just think that they're going to get the game. And when you sort of see a lot of talk coming out of the camps and saying, oh, this guy's really ready to go. Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if Erasmus is that guy though.
Yeah, true.
I think, that's when you sort of start thinking that they'll play.
Well, you've had a big man crush on Erasmus pre-draft. You were devastated missing out on him.
I wanted the Mighty Weagles to pick him up. He went to the Crosstown Rivals, so that was great. But Erasmus, I think fantasy-wise, check out the draft analysis on him because it's pretty special.
Phil Smeets, also known as Ponyfish Islanders. Ben Hobbs, he wants to know about him. Will he have a role straight away in the Dons midfield, and what's his average projection for 2022?
Probably pretty gross on the average front, but I think he could play early just based on, we talk about getting those votes of confidence from either coaching staff and we've had Dyson Heppel come out and basically say this guy could play pretty early. I know some players do that for anyway just to get the confidence up. Yeah. I do probably think, I probably take that into account in saying, hey, this guy might play pretty early. And especially because the Dons rolled out, Cox, Perkins pretty much straight away. I think Perkins took to round 3 last year, but Cox was pretty much straight in. So they're playing the kids at the Essendon, so it wouldn't surprise me if he plays. I think the role, I'd probably err on the side of caution in the sense of he's not going to be fieldable this year. It's going to be a 60 something average at best, just because I don't think you'll get the time on ground or the centre bounces or the role.
Someone like Perkins can play forward, played the junior stuff where Hobbs is pretty much a midfielder, right, from in the junior days?
But
not sure. I know they kind of slot him in different spots, but
I think he could play. But
I just think the fantasy scoring is probably not going to be there, unless he gets a full-time midfield gig, which
that's what I'd expect anyway. But could be wrong. We don't know enough about rookies until we see them after a full AFL preseason. I'd suggest he'd be a low scorer, but a very good prospect in the next couple of years.
All right, next one.
Simon Moore, do you think Sidebottom is a buy as an 88 averaging forward? Do you see him getting midfield time, or could he be the 31-year-old type that just fades fast?
Now, I'm assuming this is because you're having a tilt at the flag, so you want to buy a forward, but I personally just see him fading a bit this year. I think Collingwood will just look to use youth as much as they can, especially through the guards. I don't see Sidebottom really going into the midfield unless for some reason Mccrae wants to just be competitive from the get-go and thinks playing his most senior ones in there. But I guess those younger ones will complement, Adams, DeGoey, Lipinski, most likely. Probably Pendlebury will still roll through there, being though he's still the captain, right? So he probably still will play through there. I just don't see him getting that kind of juicy midfield role, be stuck up forward. And I think he'll still probably average around 80. I don't think it's going to drop super low, but I'm not sure how much you'd want to give up for someone who's probably only got 1 or 2 seasons left.
So where do you think he'll just play basically a lot of forward?
A lot of forward and tiny bit of a little bit of complementing midfield. That's
What about the wing though? I mean, are the wings,
he does play, I guess he did play
taken? Because we talked about it before.
We think Poulter would
Who's going to take the Chrissy Main role?
We expect Poulter.
God, the thing is they just don't have that many vets. It's could he just be? I kind of see where Simon's coming from here. Yeah, we don't know. We just don't know so much about what coaches are thinking at this time of year, especially with a new coach. But
again, we saw him on the wing a bit last year, and it wasn't super great for fantasy. It was better.
History is just so good with Sidebottom that I don't know. The only thing that holds him back are the injuries and stuff. So.
Yeah, I know. 31.
I wouldn't write him off, is what I'm saying.
No, I wouldn't write him off. He's still going to be handy. Still be an 80
I wouldn't
average.
say an 80, man. I'd say 85, 90 minimum. I think he's going to hover around that 88 at least.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe I'm writing him off a little bit too much. I don't know. Wait and see.
Next question from Matthew Wright. Is there any info coming out of Collingwood regarding new playing positions / styles under new coach Mccrae? I think it's too early, right?
Yeah, well, the word is he's actually come out and said he wants to play more pressure footy and he wants to improve inside 50. So basically it tells me he wants, tacklers, 1%ers, the kind of, high intensity type of players and, players that use the ball well, essentially. So, yeah, someone I don't know, players that use the ball better. I think John Noble's a very good user of the ball. They moved him up to the wing at the end of last year. So he's someone I think might benefit.
He's one I thought about including, actually. Yeah. In the, maybe he's the guy that I should have put in for the Quaynor, but he's 2G for P, isn't he?
I think he was just under. I'm not really sure. But I think he's someone who goes up to, I think he might be close. He's someone who I think he plays on a wing this year a bit more because he did it at the end of last season as well. I think Poulter, also being a good user, he'll be given more opportunities as well. So there's your wings maybe sorted. I don't know. Yeah. Someone like Bianca who didn't have a great disposal efficiency last year. I know he was warming into it, so he might be a bit of a worry. I think he won't be fantasy wise, but I think a player like Bo McCreary they'll like because he's a bit of a tackler and things like that. But I don't think he will actually increase his fantasy scoring or anything like that. But I think they'll play some of those younger types in there. So I don't know. We'll see how it goes. But
I want to say with the Trent Bianca ball use stuff that you're talking about. I remember, and I've just double checked it to make sure, but he's coming out of his draft year, he was like known as an elite user. So that's where I kind of think there's heaps of upside there, and he could be used in roles that
good.
Maybe
last year was just a bit of an anomaly.
I think it's an anomaly.
Yeah, cool. All right, that's a wrap. So thank you for listening to the Keeper League podcast for another week. Make sure you get around on our socials at Keeper League Pod on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. We need to build up those Instagram followers. I don't know how we do that. Maybe just put up better content. Maybe that's the issue. Maybe we just
the sunnies will get you over the line. Believe me.
Yeah, hopefully we'll put the video up there if you want to see Dossie's sunnies.
It was actually pretty awkward moment. It didn't really get the whole.
I'll fix it up, mate. I'll make it look amazing.
Okay, thank you.
Post. All good. Make sure you sign up as a member as well. All the bonus content we just talked about. You'll also get in-season episodes of the Pod as well, which aired tonight as well. So you get all the pre-season Pod episodes for you fantasy classic nuts out there. Yeah. But you get the in-season ones will be paid for gold and silver members. So make sure you remember to get access to those as well. Anything else from you, Dossie?
No, that's it. I mean, just if you're into AFL Fantasy Classic, check it out. And in season will just be a lot of the question type thing, Q&A. You've got the Statesman on there who's an absolute gun. So
all right. So hopefully we get Kaes back next week as well. And next
That'd
week...
be good. We don't have to talk as much then. We'll let him do a bit of talking.
Yeah. And next week I'll try to wear some longer shorts so I get less comments on them on the chat as well. So I'll think about what I'm actually wearing while I'm going live to stream. Anyway, thanks for listening for another week and we will talk to you again soon. See you later.
See ya.